All right, we are recording with the first episode of Wugburgia News.
Yeah, I need to come up with a good name for it, but maybe I'll ping everyone and ask them a little bit
Yeah,
because to get a name. I was thinking like, because I know in Wugburgia we did like W span or V span, but I don't want to do that again because that's kind of lame. I think we can come up with something a little more creative than that.
WNN, Wugburgia News Network. That's what we could do.
That's not very creative either.
Well, it's different. It's a little bit different.
All right,
So,
well, I know that you haven't been following the announcements too much, mostly because I noticed just now that you didn't actually have the ping roll for some reason.
yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah, you
What?
had the role for like member of parliament, but you didn't have the role for the pings. I'm not sure how that happened.
Yeah, because I was not getting ats or anything. Oh, whoa, that's a lot of wind. There's a lot of wind there. But yeah, I had the role for that, and I thought just automatically that would give me notifications. But I guess apparently it didn't.
I,
Um,
I have added it to you, so that should no
okay,
longer be a problem.
that's good. That's good. Because like I look every time I get a ping, I look in there. Um, so, anyways, I guess if we want to get into some Wugburgia topics, the election is in 3 days. What are you
It is
thinking?
indeed in 3 days.
What are the
I'm I'm
prospects?
hoping I'm hoping that we can get it by Saturday. Might have to be delayed a couple of days depending on how long it takes people, because right now the main roadblock is I am waiting on the party members to organize into group chats and elect leadership. And I have
Yeah.
appointed organizers for each party, and their job, it's not like a leadership position, their job is to just make sure elections are held and that there's like an organizational structure so that things actually happen. And it's been kind of slow.
Mm.
Like it's been 3 days since I appointed the organizers, and two, well, so for the party of the center and for WET. Wait, no, it's not for WET. For NY, they just automatically became leaders because they're the only member who registered. But of the 7 remaining ones, only 2 of them in the last 3 days have actually elected leadership. I'm still waiting on the
Yeah.
other 5.
I imagine that, some parties are, less popular than others, and so there's probably like fewer people involved. Um,
Yeah,
just not as much motivation to engage in certain parties.
I think the smaller parties are actually doing better as far as getting people elected because there's fewer people that need to be coordinated with, so the
That's
elections
true. That's a
are
good point.
sometimes like NUF was the first one. I think it was yesterday afternoon, I believe, that Aalborg was confirmed because there's just 3 people. So we just asked Nania if he wanted him as leader, and then Nania said yes, and that was a majority, and they just did that in chat right there.
Yeah, that's convenient when you have a small party like that. Um,
Yeah, but see, then you have like, let me scroll up here. You have like um, Workers Wugburgia, which is the biggest one, and they have like 8 people. That's a much different operation as far as getting getting everybody coordinated.
yeah, it might have, because I was confused. Like, it might have more activity, more motivation to do stuff, but a smaller party is going to be easier to, collaborate with everybody involved because it could be just 2 other people, like you said. That's a good point.
And then the second people that got their election done was actually 20 minutes ago while I was arranging this. Devin told me that Wet had elected Sandal somehow. That happened. So
Yeah, I thought I saw that.
yeah, that's the second one, and it looks like the DPP is like sort of in progress here because it looks like TT7 is saying that he's pretty much the de facto leader unless Kaylee decides to run, and she hasn't decided yet. So we might see something coming out of that soon as well.
Yeah, and this needs to be, decided by the time of the election, right?
I mean, if there really is issues and they just cannot agree, I might delay the election like a day or two. But I mean, ultimately they need to pick somebody, and
Yeah.
it shouldn't take. I mean, they have what, like 6 days in all now to organize the party and elect one person. If you can't do it in 6 days, I don't think giving you more time is really an effective solution.
That's true. That's true. There might be like just a point of no return for certain parties if it gets to that, you know, time. But
And if
I
it does
think
get,
I think 3 days, you know, is a sane timeline. I'd expect people to be able to pull themselves together by then.
yeah, I agree. And so we're waiting on Revolutionary Workers Wugburgia, Workers Wugburgia, the DPP, um, and the Christian Democrats are the four. Or is it? I guess four. Yeah, the four that we're waiting on for elections that haven't taken care of it yet.
Hmm. Yeah. So how do you think the different parties will do come election day?
Well, I mean, I've done some modeling already, so I already know a lot of things that might happen. Because for anyone who hasn't been paying attention to the election model, basically the system is that there's, I believe, 89 seats in all, and 50 of them are single member elected from regional districts. I know most of you guys have probably seen that map already that I posted that has all the districts. There's one person from each of those districts, and there's 50 of those. And then the other 39 districts are nationally proportional. So, like, just a proportional vote, and I used a voting system that skews a little bit towards smaller parties because the larger parties have a decent advantage in the single members. So I wanted to kind of even it out a bit.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. So like, you willing to say, who's gonna win, who's gonna be losing, or is that
Well,
like confidential?
well, on the original reaction message where you can sign up to a party, I do have percentage polling there, which is pretty much going to be the final polling for this election because it's not like we have incumbent policies or campaigning or anything like that. I mean, I could like have people do campaigning for this one, but given how long it's been taking people to set up stuff, I don't really want to wait that long because I think that will take quite a while for people to organize, and I don't want to have to delay it to say next weekend. That might be too much.
Yeah, people kind of don't seem serious enough for that if you don't have like a small party. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
I'd imagine
the
like,
the,
go ahead, go ahead.
the previous one, Wugburgia one, was kind of like this too, so I'm not super worried because people haven't seen a lot of tangible results yet. Once there's like a government and people start arguing about stuff, because I mean, giving people things to argue about is really the best driver of activity. So once there's actually things that people need to talk about, I think activity will go up.
That's true. Um, do you think you'll be able to organize maybe like debates and stuff like that for this, or would that not really work out?
Well, we did have debates. I think it was, yeah, we had a text debate for the original RP, and it didn't really work out because we had to coordinate like 8 different people, and then I was late, and then somebody else was late, and there were stand-ins, and it was very complicated. But I do still like debates, and I still want to have them because I think it's a good format. So what I thought we would do was we would have 2 debates, and the first one would be between the large parties, which is probably going to be like 3, depending. I'll find some particular threshold for how I want to determine what a large party is, but something that's polling well or otherwise has a reason to be a significant party. And then everybody else will be in the other debate, and they can all fight it out on the lower level. So
Yeah,
I thought splitting it up would reduce the like coordination issues.
I get that. I get that. Like a two-tier system. Um, I mean, if you want me to like record something, or if we ever get to that point, you can just ask. I'd be down to doing that.
Well, I'm a little bit hesitant to do like voice debates because that feels unfair because not everybody has a mic and talks regularly. So I don't really want to give like an unfair advantage just because somebody VCs a lot. So I'm a little bit hesitant to use that particular format.
Yeah, but it would be cool though.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah, it
So I
is a
might,
fair concern.
if I do like VC formatted ones, it'll probably be one-on-one, like maybe you and me plus one politician. I don't really want multiple people in the VC. That gets really chaotic, and it's much harder to sort of police that than a text version.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. It would have to be, there'd have to be roles and stuff, and there'd have to be like a moderator.
So I I'll probably now normally this wouldn't happen because it doesn't really make sense, but I'll probably have debates like maybe the weekend after the election because we didn't have an incoming election season, and I do want people to sort of be able to present their ideas in that way because I feel like especially now that there's not really DM campaigning anymore because the elections are simulated, so nobody in the server is actually voting on the elections. I think it's important that we make sure the voters are in the loop since parties are probably not going to be quite as enthusiastic about telling everybody about everything because it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, let's see what else there is here. Oh yeah, I did mention yesterday that uh, unlike the previous version of the RP, which was basically just how many people can you convince to vote for you, this one is much more like numbers based, but I want to avoid it being like spreadsheet based, so a lot of it is sort of vibes. So I will be considering people's campaigns, like how they like their actual messaging and their materials, and I will actually be uh, like that will be affecting their polling, and actually I'm going to publish regularly like polling estimations so people can actually see where they're at in the middle of the election cycle.
Yeah. Are you worried that that might be in some way biased? Right? Like
I mean, I don't really care like for any of the parties more than other ones because like they're all fine. The only thing I'm going to have an issue with is if people like start being goofy and like unrealistic or doing things that are like incoherent and don't really make sense.
yeah. So that's reasonable. But like yeah, I say that. I say like, "Oh, what if like you have some bias and like, that is sort of swaying how the elections look." Um but beforehand, I mean, there already was a bias just from the community, right? Because WUG is very left wing. So,
And yeah, it was very like everybody who voted, almost everybody was either like a diehard politician of a single party who would never change their vote because they have like an elected position in that system, or like a person who doesn't interact with the RP at all beyond being pinged by a specific party to vote, and so therefore has no motivation to change their opinions because they don't have a stake at all in what happens. So that was like the main reason that Silly originally proposed that we should not do voting by individual people because it leads to some like irrational behavior where like a scandal could hit a party, like the scandal hit the DVP a couple times, and it did not actually change their polling at all. I think they actually went up a little bit. because there's no swing voters. Nobody ever changed their minds because everyone's already picked a side.
Exactly, right? Like, we're all disconnected from, like, we're not affected by the outcomes of an election, so it doesn't really alter, like, our vote if we find out that, like, one party is, like, corrupt or whatnot.
I have arranged a group chat where I'm just gonna put every party leader and I'll just switch them out as they get appointed and removed, just to make it easier for me to like dispense information directly to party members. So I tell all the party members and then they tell all of their group chats, and that's just an efficient way of me telling all of the politicians a particular thing without having to individually make sure that every single person is listening on my own. That would be really time consuming and inefficient.
Yeah, that seems like a good idea.
And let's see what else there is. The only part of the election system that I still need to work out is sort of like the regional boost, because I don't want it to just be a uniform swing in every election. Like, I want parties to be able to concentrate their focus in like specific districts, or like if there's a policy, like I know in the original RFP people were talking about building a dam on a specific river. I want that to be able to influence the electorate's opinions of the people who live in that particular area where that thing is happening, rather than just on a blank, even national scale. I think that'll make for some more interesting swings and make it a little bit harder to predict districts, because I feel like if it's just a national swing, somebody could pretty easily come up with a model that very well approximates mine and basically predict every single election using the polling. It's not very fun.
Yeah. But that's a level of
So
detail that's pretty impressive.
yeah, I think I've sent screenshots of my I have a Google sheet where I model all of this. It's just like the whole screen is just like a huge grid of numbers that I'm copying and pasting into different columns and doing math on and stuff.
Yeah. Um, way more complicated than, oh, you propose this policy, roll a d20.
Yeah, I do need to set up. So I do need to set up the regional boost, but because that's based on party policy that they do during the term, it's not actually relevant for this election because there is no outgoing term for me to do the math on. So I'm going to worry about that a little bit later once the term starts. But I think it'll be pretty straightforward. And for the polling, I'm actually going to. I haven't worked out the exact details, but I'm going to have a little bit of a randomization system where not every poll is perfectly reflective of the actual underlying sentiments. There'll be like a little bit of variation. So even going into election day, you don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's nice.
Also, we did agree, I think the number we chose was 3% for the sort of like minimum requirement, because I don't want, one of the drawbacks of the system that I use for apportioning seats on the national list districts is that it does benefit the smaller parties, which is what I want, but it also it makes it so that every party that has more than 0 votes, so any party that gets any votes at all, ends up with a seat automatically. Even if they just have like one person in a million, they'll automatically get one seat, which is obviously not what we want to do at all. So I have a threshold implemented so that you have to reach a certain percent of the vote to actually get a seat, so that we don't end up in a situation like the modern Netherlands, where they have so many parties because the threshold's super low, so you can get into parliament with like 50,000 votes. So like there's like a bunch of parties with like 1 or 2 seats. I don't want that at all,
Yeah.
because I don't want it to be a 2-party system, but I also don't want it to be like ungovernable. So I'm trying to strike a balance here.
Yeah, seems like a reasonable idea. Just have a threshold there. Um, I mean, you're might be vaguely familiar with my proposed political system. Does a similar thing. You just choose from like the top 100 parties, and those parties fill the 100 seats with weighted votes.
Yeah, so the threshold is 3% right now, which means that every party except NY is getting a seat in the national list. So NY isn't getting any seats at all because they're not winning any electorates. Their vote count is really small because it's 1.7%, and that's not enough to even make it to the second round in any of the districts. Once I implement the regional buffs, because they're an ethnic minority party, I can like give them support in certain places based on how many people they were, and they might actually be able to win like some districts outright. But I haven't done that yet, so they're not doing very well.
Yeah, sounds really interesting.
So right now, I mean, given the polling, the CDP and the DPP are pretty even. DPP is a little bit behind, so I don't think the CDP will win a majority of seats outright, but because there are single list or single member districts, it is possible to win a majority of seats like as one party. It's not totally unrealistic. It can happen, but I don't think it's going to have 27, 28% is not enough to win a majority of seats outright. But it can be done. Like I could see a party with say 40% getting a majority of parliament by itself. That could happen.
Yeah.
So right now, I'm imagining that it's probably going to be. I think center will probably be close to a majority, but they're going to need a coalition partner, and I don't know obviously the individual leaders' tastes have a big influence on what actually gets done, because like my imagination is not actually what people will decide to do, but I would imagine probably the center as the third largest party is probably going to be the coalition partner for the CDP because they're pretty similar,
That's true.
and under the current model, it's the DPP, the CDP, and the center who are actually winning any electorates, and everybody else is restricted to the proportional seats because they don't have enough to actually win a whole district by themselves. But the proportional seats ensure that they're not just totally locked out of parliament like they would be in, say, Britain or the United States.
Yeah. Because that's like the contrast between a federal representative system and a proportional representative system. Yeah.
If you look at, say, New Zealand, they have a similar system to what I've done here. I like theirs a lot. It's a little more complicated than mine, so it does an even better job of making everything really proportional, but that would take a huge amount of additional work, so I think this is pretty close.
Yeah, the Germans, I believe, have a proportional uh, representation in their federal government, but then they have like another body that's federal representation, and that controls only certain things. So
Yeah,
it's like kind of like
the
a
Germans
balance.
the Germans they have this thing called leveling seats where they have the separate like the single member and the proportionals, but the proportionals they aren't just weighted towards smaller parties. They're weighted in the perfect way that every party will get just enough list seats to make the whole thing overall perfectly proportional, so they can have perfect proportional representation while also having single member districts at the same time. But that takes a huge amount of additional math, which I don't really think is necessary.
Yeah. I like it, but that's just me.
Oh, and yeah, for the electorates, I did want to improve because first past the post does suck really bad. Even if it is only part of the legislature, it is still quite bad. So I did implement a two-round system. Like if you're familiar with the French legislature, they have a similar system where everybody votes, and then there's a second round where the top 2 go up, so people can vote again. So it helps improve the proportionality a little bit. It helps sort of even it out and make another choice based on who the more popular people are. And it also helps to ensure that smaller parties don't just totally die in the electorates, because in the first round you can still vote for that smaller party that you like more, because even if they don't do well enough to make it to the second round, you can just vote for somebody else in the second round. There's nothing stopping you. So there's much less of a disincentive to only vote for the really big parties that could actually win.
Yeah, I see that. That's a good idea.
So if you just look at the first round, which basically makes it complete first past the post with no additional steps, I think, like, of the 50 seats, I think the CDP wins like 30 of them, or 32, and then the DPP wins the other 18, and nobody else wins anything else because they're just too small, they can't make it. So, with for the second round, I'm not going to go into details because I don't want to spoil it, but there are third parties that are winning appreciable numbers of those electorates outright by themselves, and it's much better, especially for making sure that the 2 big parties don't just totally dominate the whole legislature.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you, because now that you say all this, are you going to be simulating strategic voters?
Well,
probably not.
I'm not simulating them in the first round because that's really complicated, but on the second round, I will be saying, oh, maybe this district ends up being on the second round a runoff between like the center and the DPP. So like I will be saying, CDP got these votes in the first round. Most of those voters will probably pick center over the DPP on an ideological basis. That makes much more sense. So the second round is it is weighted based on how the parties that didn't make it do. So for the party leaders, if you guys are listening to this, keep in mind, even if you're not in a position to win any of the electorate seats, even on the second round, even if you're not in that position, you helping to increase your vote still helps parties that are bigger and similar to you. So if you're like Workers Wugburgia, even if you can't win any electorates, even on the second round, you inflating your votes does still help the DPP get more seats, because those voters are simulated moving there mostly in the second round. So you still have an impact, even if you're not actually making it there.
Was there anything else you wanted to mention?
I don't know how long we've been running so far. I think it's been at least 20 minutes.
It's 28 minutes right now.
Alright, I actually didn't... After you were mentioning how long that was, I was like, wait a minute, maybe this won't be very long at all, but it seems that there was actually quite a bit to talk about, so
I just didn't know, like, what you wanted it to be, like, if you wanted to just be me talking about it, or something else. So that was what the confusion was.
If you want to get like more invested in it, because I know this recording has been mostly just me talking and you giving like one sentence responses or asking me questions, because I know most of the things. But if you want to get more involved now that you have the ping roll, you can contribute your own opinions and thoughts. I wouldn't mind that at all.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you answering the questions. I think it's very interesting to try and do that intense level of simulation for this. Very, very interested to see how things turn out.
I have put in a lot of hours into the actual simulation, but a lot of those hours are also to ensure that actually running the election does not take 4 hours every single time. So I think it's a very optimized spreadsheet. There's a lot of automation. So if you just gave me polling numbers and a grid which basically tells me where voters will go on the second round, if you just gave me those 2 things, which is all I need, and just like no other context, just said run me this election, I could probably have the whole thing done in like an hour and a half to 2 hours, and that includes the first and second round.
Wow.
Yeah, and I have to simulate each party individually in every district, and then I have to simulate each district's second round voting one at a time. So I have to do that 50 times in a row. And even then, it's pretty optimized. Like each district probably takes like 1 minute on average to do the math for, maybe like 45 seconds. It's about as optimized as it can get given how complicated it is.
Well, yeah. Again, I look forward to seeing how this all pans out. Yeah, if you don't have anything else to mention, then I guess we'll wrap things up.
One more thing I did want to mention briefly before I forget is, along with the election system, I am also going to be reworking a little bit the actual parliament, how the backbenchers, which are basically the NPCs, because not every person in parliament is an actual player, because like if the DPP gets 30 seats, there's not 30 people playing that party. So we do need like simulated people. And Silly had a like very simple like you just tell them how to vote and they vote system. I'm going to implement like a little bit of variation. Like you're going to have a statistic of how unified your party is, and it'll make it easier or harder to convince your backbenchers to vote the way you want them to.
Yeah.
But I did have a much more complicated. I think there's a document somewhere I have where I laid like a really complex and detailed system for how I'm gonna get each individual MP to have their own voting preferences and stuff. But I scrapped that because the amount of work it would take is just
Yeah, that would be a lot.
enormous.
That would be a
Yeah, it
lot.
would
I
like it would be like
imagine
yeah,
there.
I'd have to do it for every single bill, and it would take so long.
So we're working with a system here where you have some of the seats that are taken up by real people, and then the rest of them that are taken up by these NPCs. And then
Yeah,
obviously you could actually record how the real people would vote, and then maybe you
yeah.
could like base the rest of the votes uh, off of like the percentage of a whole that they voted for or against, right? So like in proportion to what the real people did, but then add noise maybe. That's just an idea off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
noise is always good, like the polling noise. I don't want to. One of my big worries is that, given that there is literally a Google Sheet that is running all of this, that it just becomes kind of like a numbers game. It becomes a spreadsheet simulator where people are just basically doing things to make certain values go in certain directions to make certain things happen, and that's not very fun. Especially, I was worried about that with how like computerized and automated this is. So I have implemented a decent amount of like my own personal judgment, like for the campaigning. Like I'm just gonna look at the poster and I'm just gonna subjectively rate that poster on how good I think it is, rather than like having some like rubric of, ooh, it checks these boxes, it checks these boxes, it says these things, it says these things. Here's the amount of impact that's going to have on your polling. That's not a good way to encourage making these kind of posters. I want people to be creative. I want people to surprise me. I want people to do things that I was not expecting them to do. So I think that kind of subjective measure is more encouraging of that kind of behavior.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like you can have, instead of a certain action determining a certain amount of support, you can have it suggesting a certain amount of support, or implying like maybe you get support or maybe it fucks up and it tanks you. Stuff like that can make things interesting. But you don't want it to
Yeah.
be obviously too noisy to where it's random. You want people to be
Yeah,
able
I
to
am
like.
I am gonna tell party leaders, like, here is like a ballpark estimate of like if you make a piece of like a poster, or like you make a speech or something, like here's a general idea of how this is going to go into your polling, and people will be able to see this too, because I'm probably going to issue polling probably weekly, maybe like every 2 or 3 days as the election really gets closer. But so people are going to be able to see not just like oh, let me DM people to see if people have changed their minds, but actually, like, here's the things I've been doing this week. Are my numbers actually going up, or do we need to switch our strategy? Do we need to get together and talk about our behavior if we need to do something different from what we've already been doing? And one more thing I wanted that to play into is for the noise, for the polling, I'm going to start the noise high and I'm going to make the noise go down as the election gets closer, because that's really what happens in real polling, because election is much more frequent as the election comes right up. So I want it to get more accurate as the cycle continues. So I want to see people, like, the idea would be like people get in the group chat every week. The leadership posts all of the polling numbers that they've received from the model and say, okay, here's what I want you guys to do. Here's what's been working. Here's what's not been working. Here's how we're doing with these demographics. What do we need to change the strategy? What numbers do we need to improve? What numbers are we okay with? I want to see that kind of critical thinking where people are actually getting together and talking about what they need to do to make their numbers go up and who they can appeal to, rather than just, oh, it went up 1, here's what we can do to make it go up like 1.5. Here's the criteria we need to make a poster, because that's not how this is supposed to work. So I'm hoping this will encourage that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, if it's anything like how you describe it, I think it would. There's a lot of wind. Just so you know, you've got a lot of wind.
Yeah, I know. I've been hearing the wind too.
Yeah.
There's not much I can do about it.
Well, if that's it, I guess I'll end it off here. That was episode 1 of Wugburgia News. I hope you enjoyed hearing about, how the new system works, all of the intricacies, and all the work that's going into the simulation to make it an interesting experience.
Yeah, and I also want to encourage anyone who's listening, and also Pasta in particular, like, if you guys know people who might be interested in this, get them in, because, like I said earlier, that this happened with the previous RP, so I'm not too worried, but I do want to make sure that with all this preparation and all the good things that we could see coming, that it doesn't just die because not enough people are playing and it just sort of fizzles out in a couple of weeks. I don't want that to happen at all, and I don't think anybody else wants that to happen. So, you don't need to put in like hours of work, but if you know somebody in this WUG server or somewhere else who might be interested in it, drop them a link, see what happens, get more people in.
Yeah, and I think, maybe if I could just, humbly make a suggestion, maybe to make it easier for people who aren't familiar with, how the role play works or anything like that, like maybe make like a little graphic or something so people can look at it and just immediately know, okay, this is what the legislature looks like, this is what we're doing when we get involved in a party, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I should probably when I have time, I'll get a document or some short thing together that explains all of this, because I do have a document that outlines all of this, but it's quite outdated. It explains a lot of things that I haven't decided to actually do, so I need to make a new version of that. That's a great idea.
Yeah. My goodness, I'm getting like new ideas right at the end of this, but I was just gonna ask you, like, obviously I take it you're going to be simulating, scandals and, maybe events that take place, like natural disasters or something like that. But are you also going to have, like, maybe a court system or, like some kind of judicial system that is taken into account, or is that just, like, out of the picture?
I mean, I don't want this to become like Wugburgia, where it's like a very like position-based thing. Like, I want this to be about, like, your primary job as a party should be making the things you say you want to do happen and making voters like you. Those should be like the two things. If we start adding courts and other things, it becomes much more of a like scheming, like where you're just talking to other people and trying to like get positions or whatever. And I don't want it to be that far. If I do have a court, it'll probably be sort of like the U.S. Supreme Court, where like sort of pick judges of a certain like ideological orientation, and they can like make rulings when certain things happen. But like I probably won't let people actually be judges, because I feel like that opens the door to a lot of weird and unnecessary
Yeah.
things.
And I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting sort of like, you know, maybe who gets to select a judge. Like maybe that's like a special motivator for a certain party to win over another. Or maybe the decisions that, you know, the Supremes make, maybe that affects voters in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, I could see having a sort of thing where it's like, oh, there's one center judge that was like appointed by the center and has their ideology. There's like 2 CDP judges. There's 3 DPP judges. This is sort of the ideological balance of the court system. This is how things are going, and this is the way that they're going to make rulings. I could see that. I might do that as like once the next term starts. I might try to see if I can get people appointed, although I'm not sure exactly how I want to do it, because I don't want to open up all the positions all at once, because then we just kind of like, then whoever's in charge is just going to be able to appoint all of the judges right off the bat, which is not really what I'm going for.
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. Well, I think that covers everything that I wanted to cover.
We keep saying, I think this is the 3rd time
Yeah.
we're all done, and then it just keeps going because somebody brings up something and we start talking for another 15 minutes.
Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry about that last one.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, it's good that we have so much to talk about that we literally can't stop ourselves from ending the episode, you know. That's like, you know, I mean, I think that speaks well for how much depth and interesting things there are for this.
Indeed, indeed. I definitely agree with that. But yeah, we'll see how all this pans out next week when we do our next episode. And hopefully we'll have a lot more to talk about then, seeing the results of all this. So yeah.
If you have time, we could probably even do this, like, because there's going to be election, we could even do this again on, like, Monday or Tuesday.
Sure, sure.
If you want to do it a little early. And then we'll probably switch over, like, we'll shift it and then probably start doing it on weekends, because I think that's when people have more time. Because I would like to have people actually listening in. It would be nice to have people live. We could even, if you want, we could start doing it on WUG.
We could. And then, you know, get questions from chat and stuff.
I could set up a stage for this in the future. That would be good.
Yeah, that would be very good. Anyways, I'm gonna end the recording.
Yeah.
And I'm probably